fact, take over permanent positions in there. But it really wasn't for the board to recruit an entire team. We had to start at the top. And the fact that Mr. Nula was at that point, in fact, had been relieved of his duties, we thought we needed to appoint a leader, a CEO, who would be capable of assembling a team that would be able to meet the challenges, but for us, more importantly, be able to seize the opportunities that we thought offered enormous potential for our country. And we then decided to do the process properly and rigorously, because it was important that we got the best person for the job. And we had a huge amount of debate amongst ourselves and sometimes even outside of ourselves, because what kind of person were we looking for? And we said we were looking for a world-class person who had international experience and respect, and somebody who understood especially the markets where we wanted to grow, like Africa. And we did a global, we appointed Spencer Stewart, an international headhunting firm, because we thought that it had to be a proper process, that a group who had access to a global pool of skills would be able to give us a set of options. We had some debate and decided we were not going to limit the pool only to South Africa or indeed to Africa, because the script very much had to be, one of the key things was somebody who understood the African aviation market and the airline market, but not exclusively, because Europe was a major trading partner, the Americas was underserviced at the time. And so we went, and we were quite surprised at the caliber of people who applied. There was the deputy CEO of a major Western airline who applied for the job. There was one CEO of one of competitors in Africa who had an exceptional track record line. The rest of a group of people from all over the world. It was a short list. And at the end of that very rigorous process, the person who emerged was Cesar Mzimela, who in fact and she came out because her of background. There was a background, most of her professional life. In fact, it was subsequently influencing executives, not only core level, in fact, and had in fact a big piece of she was the serving CEO of which in fact was a major partner, was first owned by the African government as well. And so she understood that alignment with Mr. Mr. Mela, we really thought was a very good candidate. And we thought that she's also a that person, and that she emerged with confidence with the was in the world that was that had to offer. And your time at age 7 of 18. We lead the process for the presentation to the board of strategy to take SAA forward. And over the page, you start to describe in some detail what that strategy was. I ask you first of all to describe what engagement was Mr. Holt around that strategy. The extent to which you engaged with the department in its development. It's very important for us to have our shareholders give us inputs about what the organization for us to be together, that we will be able to deliver against it. And our shareholders' expectations obviously economic growth, job creation, and transformation. And to be able to do that, we need to work out what our most competitive offers would be as airline. And so we understood that our contribution would not just be to carry people in aeroplanes, it was to contribute the very hard benefits of trade and tourism, and then in fact foreign affairs as well. But we also need to be, how do we make ourselves part of the general transport mix for the effective and efficient transportation of goods and services and people in a in an economy, in a country that was positioning itself to become globally more competitive and in fact quite aggressively grow in that way. So in terms of our engagement, Ms. Mzimela and her team went through all the processes. There was an aviation unit in the Department of Public Enterprises, and in fact made sure that we all understood and were aligned on how we would contribute to those broader goals of our country. And at the end of that, Ms. Mzimela and her team presented to the board at a strategy session at the end of October 2010, this what was to become known as the new growth strategy, central to which was identifying that we sharpen our areas of focus around where our country was going to compete globally. And our country at that stage, as I was saying, was placing far more emphasis, and we saw the opportunities to align ourselves with what was the BRICS bloc, to trade within it. During my time as the CEO of South African Tourism, we already started to, in fact, grow with huge success. Tourism markets in India, and in fact in China, and so on. We also agreed that given we needed to renew the fleet, to be able to give us the kind of aircraft that we could actually fly into some of our African destinations, which were not 2-hour flights between Joburg and Cape Town, but now 6-7-hour flights. We didn't have aircraft. The ones we used domestically couldn't do that, and the ones we used to London, it was just fuel completely silly to do that. So in that development, we all arrived at the same page, that SAA, and how we arrived at the fleet, the sense of what fleet we were looking for, and the levels of capitalization that we needed, was aligned with trade and tourism and our people interaction as a country. The board felt comfortable. Minister Hogan and her team joined us in the last 1.5 days, I think, of that session. We presented the whole strategy to her, but as I said, that obviously she would have been consulted. I don't know what the internal processes were, but she was comfortable, and her team were comfortable. Her experts, her advisors, specialists in the department all signed off on that strategy.
And Ms. Carolus, as I have it from your statement, that occurred in October 2010, is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am. It's literally the end of the month.
Indeed. And then as you conclude on page 8 of your statement, immediately thereafter, on the 1st of November 2010, Minister Hogan was replaced by Minister Gigaba, is that correct?
That is correct.
And so you go over the page at page 9 to talk about the steps that you took to ensure continuity after Minister Gigaba took over from Minister Hogan. Can you explain those steps to the Chair?
Chairperson, I of course knew Minister Gigaba. He served as the president of the Youth League during my tenure in the leadership as the ANC. And so I just called him and I congratulated him and said to him I would just like to have a courtesy meeting with him to just update him in the work that we had done with his predecessor and to enable him to be familiar enough to engage with us, because it was extremely important for us that there be that understanding. As far as we were concerned, whoever the minister was, was a representative of government, was a shareholder, but if that minister was not aligned with the vision and the strategy that we had evolved, it could create a lot of difficulty, and that took us quite a long time to get the alignment through the Minister Hogan and the DPE with trade and industry, with tourism, to make sure that the airline and where it was going would serve those objectives. And so it was important that success needs to understand some of that. So, but we didn't want to, so I explained to him that what the process had been, that literally the day before we had concluded and sent off to Minister Hogan, and then the very next day she was replaced by Minister Gigaba. And so I outlined to him that I didn't expect him to sign off on it, but there was urgency, but he was obviously also becoming the minister of the same teams in the DBE, and we assumed that there would be continuity in departmental levels where the ministers came and went. There should be that. Because those plans which ministers sign off on obviously are taken in processes, in bilaterals with their colleagues, as well as into cabinet from time to time as is required, like when we want to open a new route to Kwadana in Africa. It would have to go through a set of processes with the Department of Transport. So we assumed that when Gaba came, that there would be, the same teams would be familiar. So we explained to him that we understood that usually ministers bring advisors with them to help them in that transition with the established officials in the relevant departments. And I explained to him that we would get people to take his advisors. He had one person, a professor at UJ at the time, whom he called in to be one of his policy people afterwards, but it was just an introduction. And we then said, please take the next few months and work through it. But if there is any, I said to him, we had just signed this off in October. In order, in terms of corporate governance, we now had to take it to a board meeting for the SAA board to sign off on it. And that was going to happen in November. And if there was anything at any point as his teams are being briefed that he needed clarification or that he was worried about, he should just phone me and we'll go out of our way to in fact clarify. He had indicated all along that nothing came up from him or his team that worried them. And as a consequence, it was business as usual as far as the shareholder expectations at the high level. We, in all state-owned entities, we have what we call a corporate plan. You have to have a strategy, which then becomes a corporate plan that works on a 4-year cycle, and of course it's a rolling cycle, so every year you extend, you work out what year 4 looks like. And so no concerns were raised by Minister Gigaba or the team under Minister Hogan, and so we in fact went into the full budgeting process the following year of 2011 with that same corporate plan, with a vision which we had crafted with Minister Hogan's team, was still in Minister Gigaba's team as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Indeed. One of the things you did in the course of that engagement, as I have it, is presented a strategy to Minister Gigaba on the 18th of April 2011. That appears at the bottom of paragraph 22 on page 9. I'd like to take you to one aspect of that strategy because you attach it to your statement. Chair, for your benefit, it commences at paginated page 34 of Exhibit R, but the relevant page I'd like to take Ms. Carolus to is at page 62. That is one of the slides which formed part of that strategy briefing to Minister Gigaba.
Did you say 62?
62, indeed. Ms. Carolus, on that page you are summarizing some of the operational challenges, operational changes that you were proposing implementing. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the first item on that page, but just to underscore its relevance. In the latter course of your statement and your evidence today, you will be testifying about the Mumbai route and the approaches made to SAA from Jet Airways and Minister Gigaba's involvement in those engagements. One of the issues that arises there is the question of the profitability of that route. And it's in that context that I'd like to ask you to speak to paragraph 1 on that page. Because one of the things you summarize there as an operational change is that there will be routes restructuring in order to operate only profitable international routes. SAA will operate only profitable international routes by the 31st of March 2010, and network profitability must exceed any loss of an individual international route. Now, can we explore that a bit? You mentioned in your testimony the difference between point-to-point as compared with a network route. Can you explain that difference for us?
Thank you, ma'am. Chairperson, I'm glad that, in fact, Advocate Hofmeyer has introduced the airline jargon here, and not myself. But it was a very important fresh way of looking at how SAA must see its own business. A point-to-point route is some people will fly, let me use an example, London to Cape Town. It was point-to-point, so it was London to Cape Town. Johannesburg represented for us the center of a new approach, and that was of a network approach. So that when you decide how you use how you deploy your limited aircraft that you have at your disposal, because it was quite clear that we would have to shut down some routes and we would have to open up new ones. And the simple criteria was whether as a network it would be profitable. So when we speak about a network approach, the Mumbai route was quite critical, and it is true we were making losses, and we were building up that route from Mumbai to Johannesburg. Although those losses during our tenure was greatly curtailed, notwithstanding the fact that we were not in an optimal position. We had 4 flights, as we call frequency in the jargon. We would have liked to have had 7, because you make your money out of business people. But where we made that money out of the Mumbai route was, in fact, pushing those, where many of those travelers were people who sought to travel into Africa or into Brazil, to do business in Brazil or in Chile or in Latin America. Now, anyone in this room who has ever flown on the routes to Africa would know that we were charging an arm and a leg. And the simple, hard-nosed business of supply and demand applies. No one had the connectivity that we had. So as a consequence, those same travelers, we started to say we mustn't just look at what people, we mustn't just stop marketing to people Mumbai to Joburg. We must actually start marketing it as a package that you can move on. And so that was why it was so important for us to not just measure. And sometimes in business people talk about, even about loss leaders, you take a bit of a pain here, but you make that money many times over. So the ticket you sell to somebody is in fact a ticket to Sao Paulo or a ticket to the Congo. So I think that was quite a big change in how we looked at that. Perhaps the other side of that coin, Chairperson, with your permission, was when we shut down the London to Cape Town thing. Both the then Premier and Mayor, 2 women I knew quite well, Helen Zille and Patricia Zille, were absolutely apoplectic about the fact that we'd done that. And we were making losses on it as well. So a similar loss-making route. But the difference there was we were not pushing people on from Cape Town anywhere. And if we have only X number of aeroplanes, and suddenly there were opportunities for us, you will see somewhere in the paperwork, Chairperson, that in 1 year, we in fact opened 7 new routes into Africa, and it was because of that. Because we could take that aircraft that was flying people, mainly leisure travelers who traveled in economy class, and then that's all you do, you put them down there. Whereas in fact, we could use that same aircraft to fly into other destinations that in fact we would push them on out of South Africa. We would also, we did the same thing with, maybe let me not get too caught up. Another important aspect of the network process, Chairperson, was it wasn't just about the tickets and the bumps on the seats, as we call it. It was also about the more people we bring through Johannesburg and therefore South Africa as a hub. We're growing AXA with the landing, because every passenger in that ticket, there's a price that goes towards AXA, our airports company. Everybody who stops here, there's in fact food that Air Chefs provides. There's in fact the South African Airways technical services, which is sadly diminished, and I make a very cursory comment, but it is actually a big problem that's been so driven into the ground as part of this whole going on at SAA over the past few years. But so using a hub strategy creates benefits way beyond the ticketing process and benefits there, because it creates air chefs jobs, it creates supplier demands of people who provide the food, it provides cleaning services for people who transit here. So when we lose, every flight we lose that lands in Johannesburg, it has a huge knock-on effect of a set of economic benefits for a country.
Thank you, Chair. I note that we have passed the usual time for the tea break. If it would be convenient to take the adjournment now.
Yes, we'll take the tea adjournment now, and we will resume at 25 to 12. We adjourn.